Welcome, everybody. This is the Orange is the New Black podcast. I'm doing a special episode in our PFF series. This week, we've got none other than Sam Monson. Sam, please talk to the people. Tell them how you're doing tonight. It's Orange is the New Black podcast. Normally, I'm joined with my buddy Ace Boogie. He had to do some stuff, and so they're probably used to seeing that. But we are really, really glad to have you here tonight.
Thanks for having me. I'm doing good. Let's talk some football.
All right. So how are you feeling about the upcoming season as far as the Bengals go in general? Like, do you have any general thoughts or any hot takes that you just want to lead off and just throw in people's face that you hate somebody or you think is really, really cool for the Bengals?
No, nothing crazy. I just think that, it's an exciting time for the Bengals because of Joe Burrow and now Jamar Chase and what those guys can do. And obviously the big thing we all want to see is that Joe Burrow comes back 100%, and he looks like the guy that he was before that knee injury took him out. I think obviously the last thing any of us want to see is Burrow comes back and he's not quite the same guy, or you see any kind of lingering holdover effect from that knee injury because, it wasn't just like a routine knee injury, like Tom Brady apparently now played the Super Bowl with a torn MCL, and nobody expects Tom Brady to be any different now. I mean, he was good in the Super Bowl, right, with playing on the injury, but Joe Burrow's injury, like, that was severe. It was multiple things. It was a major knee injury of the kind that can cause lingering problems, but let's hope they don't, because Burrow, I thought, was really encouraging year one. And now you pair him up with a guy who he had this incredible connection with in college. And, just on paper, that could be a phenomenal, phenomenal hookup with those two guys. Just these deep passes from Burrow to Jamar Chase again. Those are so good at LSU. I'm excited to see that again.
Right. And the same thing for us. And I say us, I'm talking Who Dey Nation. For the most part, we developed a series on this channel here. It got really, really popular, picked up a lot of traction. It was called The Civil War, where we picked Panay versus Jamar Chase. I was on Team Chase. My partner was Panay. If you were in the Bengals draft room and you were sitting there at the time, based off of what you just said, Burrow's injury, different things of that magnitude, what's the direction that you would go? And does that have anything to do with the impact of the position?
It's funny because everybody was like staunchly on one side or the other, right? There were like battle lines drawn and you were either Chase or you were Sewell. And, there was no like détente between them. It was one or the other. And I could see the argument either way. And honestly, I think that none of us are smart enough to be able to weigh all of the various elements involved in that decision accurately, right? Because it isn't just, do you fix the offensive line or do you fix the receiver group? Because you're going to get a chance to come back in the second, third round and address the other position. For the offensive line, it isn't just one, guy fixing the whole unit. You need to fix most of the offensive line, right? So it's not just does Sewell fix it? It's how much does just grabbing one guy, address the offensive line, or how much does adding the fact that Joe Burrow now has a receiver that he has confidence in, that he can put the ball in the air sooner. And Burrow, year one, held onto the ball a little bit longer than he should. And that's the thing that all young quarterbacks tend to struggle with. So how much is he going to improve that, right? How much is that part going to improve? So there's just all these different facets. And anybody coming down and saying it's definitely this, there's no argument for the other side, I think it's crazy. And I think that's both sides, right?
Right.
So if I was the guy making the decision in the Bengals war room, I probably would have lent Jamar Chase, but I would have been on the fence. It would have been a 50-50 to me. And I would have said, let's almost vote. Let's get a consensus in the room. And if we come down 60-40 the other way, Panay Sewell versus Chase, I'm okay moving in that direction. I think it's a toss-up. I tweeted at the time that, the Bengals made the right choice going with Jamar Chase over Panay Sewell, but they would have made the right choice if they'd gone with Panay Sewell over Jamar Chase. I just don't think you can. I don't think there was a wrong call. I think either one addresses an area of need, and you were well in position to come back in the second and third round and address the other spot. So either way works.
I guess the argument would be is, okay, you could have something wrong if the impact player in the second round, or because they wouldn't have Bengals, I guess in our history, they don't have a history of trading up, right? So
Sure.
whatever will fall to them in the second round, the argument would be like you're looking at a Rashard Bateman, or you're looking at in on the other side of the fence, you're looking at a Wyatt Davis, or you're looking at these guys like that. The biggest argument that I would have is that Jamar Chase is marginally better than the wide receivers that were coming there in the second round. Do you think it was that big of a gap, or do you feel like it was just like he was better, but he's tier A, but there's a tier B with Rashard Bateman, what's the kid that went to the Elijah Moore, like guys like that?
I think there was a big gap between Jamar Chase and certainly the guys that were likely to be available in the second round. I think he is like a genuinely incredibly talented receiver. I think Devontae Smith is right up there with him. But to me, those two guys were head and shoulders above anybody else in this class. I really like Bateman as well. I think if you were, looking for a tier 2 guy, if you like, he would be like the next one that I would take in terms of a well-rounded, complete skill set. But obviously he didn't make it that far, right? Other teams thought the same thing. So yeah, it was always going to be a risk in terms of what you're left with at the other position that you don't address. But the thing about receiver, I think, is that, we've seen the last couple of years, it's getting easier and easier to find receivers that are really good. And even guys that, we might not think are up there with a Jamar Chase, or last year with a CeeDee Lamb, or whoever it is going at the top. Guys like Chase Claypool come in the middle rounds and suddenly look like one of the best receivers out there. Justin Jefferson was, I think, the 5th wide receiver off the board, set rookie records that, broke Randy Moss's rookie records. Like, those are the kind of things that are happening to these guys that don't look like the superstar prospects that are going at the top of the draft. Whereas, I don't want to say that offensive tackle is a safe pick, but I think teams probably are a little bit better at kind of identifying the difference between, a surefire first round guy and somebody who's going in the mid rounds who, maybe has the physical tools to do some of this stuff, but is not anywhere near the polished prospect those guys are. So I think if the argument is, what's the drop off like at this position when you get into the mid rounds, I think you would lean tackle. Uh-oh. Froze up. Nope. We back? Okay, now I can't hear you. Are you muted? There we go.
Yeah. No, but I'm saying I feel like we're back. I'm sorry about it. I don't know what happened, but this happens. We're live.
I thought I was gonna have to host a show for a minute.
You can host it. I mean, I'm not mad at that at all. Like you do a really good job. I actually listen to you and Steve a lot. It's one of my favorite podcasts. So if you guys if you haven't heard it or you haven't been listening to it, please make sure you check out the PFF podcast, because it's one of the best ones up there. But a lot of the different things that you were saying, I really agree with. I think for me moving forward, I just didn't see, and I think this is one of the things that we asked PFF Eager, Eric. I don't know why but we asked them that last week, and I was really talking about positional value, and just in my philosophy is that a lot of teams just aren't doing, or no teams at all are doing 7-step drops. So what you're getting from an elite tackle or elite guard or whatever offensive line play that you're looking for, I just didn't feel like it warranted the pick, and it would have been like a safe pick in my mind. But for most fans, they're looking at, like you said, you let off in the show, Burrow's had a major injury. They're like, hey, how can we keep him uninjured? And that's a big concern for me too. So there's an argument, I guess, for all of that.
Yeah, but I think, the thing about that is that one guy isn't fixing that, right? Like to keep Burrow upright, you need 5 guys that aren't a problem. And Sewell's going to make a big difference. Like, he's going to affect that, but he isn't going to fix it. So The issue with that is that, Cincinnati's offensive line last year was one of the worst in the NFL. They need to take big steps across the board. And, you can make an argument that, hey, you get Sewell in, Jonah Williams, takes a step forward next year, and all of a sudden you're getting sort of 2-3 players on an offensive line. Then it's easier to patch up 2 problem spots rather than 5. But yeah, like I think that's the strongest argument against Penei Sewell, is that, there was this graphic that went around, like a meme that was, what happens if you if you have a wider,
Yeah,
if you get chased and
yeah.
not Sewell, then Joe Burrow's getting killed or
I hated
whatever.
that graphic.
Right.
I hated that graphic.
And it's like, yeah, that's only if it's a one-on-one pass rush versus like offensive lineman thing. The problem is like you can have Sewell and then the other four guys are the reason he's getting killed and exactly the same thing is happening. So it was never quite that simple. That was always my problem with the whole argument.
Right. I think, I guess if I'm in the war room in the offseason, I think a lot of Bengals fans feel this way too, is that they didn't do enough. So one of my theories is that they put a lot of pressure on Jackson Carman like day one to play out of position and go play at the right guard spot is where they're slating him already before the season has even started. So for me, I would have liked to see him do a lot more. And then that graphic really looks silly because now we're looking at depth and you're actually looking at a guy that's actually played the position. And then you got all these guys that can kind of form a unit, and then it puts more merit to the Jamar Chase pick to me. I guess moving along with that or whatever, for a team like we're talking about the Steelers earlier, or me and my partner were talking about the Steelers earlier, for them to come into this season and now they're looking at a situation that we just came from, where you're now looking at all these moving pieces and potentially one of the worst lines in the offensive line. I mean, in the NFL. Do you feel as though that the drop off or their line on paper is really that bad, or is it people kind of overselling that right now?
I mean, I think it's pretty bad. On paper, they've got like one player that's played any kind of extensive time, one more player who's played a little bit and looked kind of good doing it, and then a bunch of question marks. And anytime you're changing that many guys on the offensive line, you're just almost certainly going to struggle next year because it's really hard. There's an offensive line, shortage in the NFL, and most teams don't have good offensive lines. When you all of a sudden have to find 4 or 5 guys to plug in, the chances of you hitting on all 4 of them, it's just so small. Like we saw this with the Jets, last year. They threw a ton of bodies at that offensive line, and we were making the point all offseason. Jets fans were like, sweet, our offensive line's fixed. We've done it. We added all these guys. We added, Mekhi Becton in the draft. We added these free agents. It's done. Like it's better. They're like, yeah, but the chance of all those guys being above average year one is really small. And, maybe 1 or 2 of the guys will work out, but the other 2 won't. And then you've got half a good offensive line. And that's what happened, right? Mekhi Becton, I think, was better than we thought he would be, but the other guys weren't. Connor McGovern didn't play well. Like you still didn't fix the offensive line.
Right.
So I think that's part of the problem with Pittsburgh is there's just too many guys they need to replace. And not all of it was their fault. Marquise Pouncey retires. David DeCastro was going to be injured anyway and wasn't going to be able to play. So they didn't really have a choice there. But I think just by default, there's a really small chance of that offensive line being anything other than a problem. And, Ben Roethlisberger has probably never needed the line more than he does right now because of his, how old he is and the fact that he isn't pushing the ball down the field as much as he used to anymore. So, yeah, on paper, that offensive line looks like a major problem for the entire offense as a whole, and the thing that's going to prevent them, taking a step forward from last year.
And it's crazy the way you set that up too is like I feel like the strategy that they went with is kind of similar to what the Buffalo Bills did the year prior. It's like go get like 8 guys, like mid-tier guys, Ty Nsekhe, all these guys like that, put them all together, and then just have a battle royale. And for me, that was one of the things that I was pushing a lot for this offseason. So for them not to do it, I feel like they're putting themselves as a Bengals fan like against another kind of crazy hole where everything really has to work, and if they don't really have like the depth pieces that I would like to see, I guess, to fill that in. Is that like a common thing that you see around the league? Like how many teams? I put this on Twitter one day. I said that I think the Bengals on paper or just going off of PFF. I talk to Evan a lot too. That's my guy. Probably tackle wise, probably the 14th ranked tackle tandem in the NFL. Offensive line, I probably we looked at every single offensive line. I said they're probably about the 22nd, maybe 18th ranked offensive line in the National Football League. Then a lot of people say, well, you're being a homer and stuff like that. I just wanted to give you or you were talking about like how offensive line play is looking around the NFL currently right now. How many teams on paper do you feel super confident come in with a starting 5 right now, offensive line play that you feel really good about?
That's the thing. There just aren't many of them. And like, everybody thinks that their offensive line is either way better or way worse than it actually is. But when you look, and this is why, when you get the AAF or the XFL, you get one of these other leagues spool up. And a lot of the reason that the play just isn't good enough is because the offensive lines are terrible, right? Like there's not enough good offensive linemen for the NFL, let alone for a second league that's trying to develop and just get viable play. And ultimately, like the offensive line is the thing that lets everybody else look good. So you might have a ton of receiver talent in one of these developmental leagues, but you're never going to see much of it because the quarterback is running for his life the entire time, and they just don't have a shot to thrive. So yeah, look, I think Cincinnati are they're not going to take a step from where they were last year to being like a top offensive line. They don't have to. Like their job is not to get great on the offensive line. It's just to get viable and to be like to have the line not be a problem and not be the reason that Joe Burrow goes down in week 12 next year. And I think they've taken some steps there. I'm with you. I think they could have done some more, and they could have thrown some more bodies at it. And like the reason that is smart is, look, it's probably going to work out like it went with the Jets, right? You're going to throw 5-6 guys at it, and 3 of them will work out. But if you only throw 1 or 2 guys at it and it doesn't work out, now you've done nothing. Like now you didn't even get better. So you have to throw resources at it and play the odds, play the fact that a lot of these guys are not going to work out. And it's better to kind of overcommit. And worst case scenario, you throw all these resources at it, you bring in 6 guys, and all of them work out, and now you have the better offensive line depth than anybody else in the NFL. And if somebody goes down, it's not a problem because you suddenly have guys that can come off the bench. Like that's the worst thing that could happen if you do like throw all these resources at it. If you don't do that and you miss on the guys that you're bringing in, now you've not only did you kind of waste the resources, but you haven't actually fixed the problem you set out to fix.
I agree 100%. And I guess let's move along because I know I spent a lot of time on offensive line, but it was a lot of people early in the day was like, man, talk to them about offensive line. So because I told a couple people, hey, I'm gonna be talking to Sam. You guys got any questions? So a lot of people actually had some really good questions about offensive line. So I'm glad you touched on that. I gotta ask you the same thing. I put this out last week on Twitter too, and this is a common thing that we talk about too as Bengals fans, because for me, I'm a fan, so I like to champion the things that I think we do best. To me, I feel as though at the very least, we are a top 5 wide receiver trio or wide receiver corps. When I came out with a ranking system, I had us listed at second, and most of it is only because of the players that we have in the prime of their career at the age they're at, and a lot of Jamar Chase ascending, and then also factoring in what Auden Tate can do if he were thrust into play. And we've seen that with him having Ryan Finley play, and he still has 600 yards as a 4th option. Most teams, and this is what I bring to anybody that will listen to my argument, is that anybody that you could say that probably would be better than that, with the exception of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? Because they're the one that just have like this extreme package to me of just all types of wide receivers, right? Any other tandem that you could bring to my attention that you feel as though is better, they're either going to have an like an older superstar, or they're going to have a guy that's battled injury or coming off a PED or something like that. So with that being said, give me your top 5 wide receiver core.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Tampa Bay would be one of them. I think Dallas would be another one that's right there. The trio they put out with Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb now, I think that's as good as anybody in the NFL, 1 to 3. I think Buffalo is still right out there, even though they lost John Brown. Bringing in Emmanuel Sanders, I think, is a smart move for them. I like what they have. I think Denver could be a sneaky one as well, even though like they don't have the quarterback to take advantage of it yet. But on paper, like Jerry Jeudy's route running translated, we saw that year 1. He's still an absolute phenom when it comes to running routes. Okay, dropped a lot of passes year 1, but that happens sometimes, right? Amari Cooper, I think, dropped 18 passes as a rookie as well. And then he's dropped 18 the last 3 years total. So sometimes that fluctuates, but they're now getting Cortland Sutton back. Tim Patrick was really good last year in his place. KJ Hamler, I still think, has a lot to offer, and we didn't see that year 1. So Denver, I think, is a group that's really good. And yeah, Cincinnati's right up there. I think it's funny how much one guy can make a difference, right? Because before the draft, you're kind of looking at that group and you're saying, this group isn't really helping out Joe Burrow that much, right? They've got T. Higgins, who played really well as a rookie, but you're kind of focusing on the things that he doesn't really do well. And then Tyler Boyd is just a slot receiver, and they need this number one. But then when you get the number one, now you're saying, well, now you got T. Higgins is this really great like number two that can win contested catches and is a possession guy, and Tyler Boyd is this great slot guy, and as you said, Auden Tate is this like great big-bodied number four. Like suddenly the picture completely changes when you bring in this one guy that you think can be that, number one superstar. And I love Jamar Chase. I think his game was fantastic. So if he does hit the NFL the way that we expect him to, or the way that we, saw from him in college, then Cincinnati's receiving group is a great one.
Right. For me, this is another thing I just want you to think about too. In the history of the NFL, we've gone back and looked. There's only about 6 different instances of 3 receivers getting 1,000 yards, right? And 2 of those instances involve tight ends. So a lot of Bengals fans are feeling like myself, feel like there's a real good chance, especially with 17 games, that they can get 1,000 yards. The one thing that I think that a lot of people probably aren't factoring in is, like I said earlier, like all those teams and stuff that you can name, like Denver is lacking the quarterback, Dallas, I believe in those guys. Amari Cooper, to me, though, at one point was considered to be a bust, and he's resurrected his career, and he's really good. He always had the talent, but there's always like these holes and flaws in it. I feel like even when I look at the metrics from PFF and different things that I look at, like just looking at slot yards and for Tyler Boyd or different things like that, he's always at the top. So then we look at T. Higgins. He was hampered by an injury at the end, soft tissue injury. Nothing to play for. He would have easily had 1,000 yards. So like, I feel like all the pieces are there to be great, but like you said, the number one is the main important part. But this is the unicorn situation. There's very rarely in time. Only time I could think about it is like when Cam Newton came into the league, where you have this quarterback that is on this contract and these guys that are ready to go like at an elite level. Like usually a quarterback comes into a bad situation. And I feel like this is one of the rare times in history, and you're going to remember this conversation, that this guy is here and he's ready with guys that are ready in the prime of their career, ready to go. No major injuries or anything like that in within sight or whatever, God willing. Let's move to defense. Looking at the defense on paper, do you have any thoughts? Like they lose William Jackson, they lose Lawson, they bring in Hendrickson, they bring in. We're thinking that they're going to extend Jesse Bates and Hubbard pretty soon. There's a couple of different things that Wouzier comes in. I think Darius Phillips always is graded really, really well by PFF. There are a lot of different pieces there. How do you feel about the Bengals defense, like coming into the season? And how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the defense is still a work in progress. They've made a couple of moves that I think are maybe lateral moves, maybe even slight steps in the wrong direction. William Jackson leaving and replacing him with a guy who's probably not going to be as good as William Jackson. Carl Lawson, I think Trey Hendrickson is probably a slight downgrade over Carl Lawson, even though he had better sack totals a year ago, like the pressure rate, those kinds of things weren't quite as good. So, it's not like Trey Hendrickson's a bad player, but it's probably a slight step in the wrong direction compared with Lawson. The good news
Mike
is
Hilton.
Yeah, Mike Hilton, I think, is a really good move. I think he's been one of the better slot corners of the last few years. So there's talent there. There are pieces on that defense that are very good, and that they have been kind of for a while. I think they've had a decent amount of talent on this unit. They just haven't kind of put it all together yet. So, I think ultimately defense in today's NFL, like, it's nice to have, but it's not going to be the thing that propels you, leaps and bounds in the right direction. The Bengals season is going to be all about what happens with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, and the defense, just needs to kind of take steps in the right direction and hold up its end of the bargain. I think it's capable of doing that. We just have to see if all those pieces can come together.
For me, I always have this mantra. I always say your offense is your defense. When I look at some of the early stuff from Patrick Mahomes, there were some things where I would look at the defense and I say, this defense isn't good at all. But if I'm on the field and I'm putting points on the board, I really don't have to do much. Do you have a philosophy, or you have like a team that you feel like right now kind of just gets it? like on paper, like they have everything that if you were constructing a team, like.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing now is that there's a bunch of different ways to win, but you're not going to get very far if you don't have the quarterback, or at least it's really, really hard to do it, right? So everybody is in this mode of let's find a guy that we believe is the future at quarterback, and then now we rush to like build everything around him. So the Browns kind of did that with Baker Mayfield. The Bills did a really good job of it with Josh Allen. The Bengals are definitely taking steps with Joe Burrow. You know, you've given him the receiving core now. Now you need to make sure that offensive line is going to be good enough. The Chiefs with Mahomes have done it in an interesting way. And because Mahomes and the offense is so good there, like they didn't need a good defense. They just needed the defense to stop being like the worst in the NFL, which it was like right at the start of his career. You know, they brought in, you know, Steve Spagnuolo, and they've sort of changed things schematically as much as they have with personnel. And now the Chiefs defense is just, it's okay, right? It's average. And average when you've got Mahomes as your quarterback is more than good enough to get you to the Super Bowl every year. So, yeah, I think there's a bunch of different ways. And then you've got, you know, a team like Pittsburgh or the Rams who have like the best defense in the NFL. And they're trying to make the offense just good enough to get there. And the Rams will be interesting this year with Matthew Stafford, you know, potentially bringing this big upgrade to that offense, because that they're, you know, the defense might take a step back from last year with Brandon Staley leaving town, but it should still be really good. Now the question is, can Stafford, you know, propel the offense to where it needs to go?
You're a pro, because before this, what I say, hey, I got to tie that in. So we just had a show. We were just talking fantasy football on our last show. One of my secret tips that I was telling everybody is like, you know, like I kind of gave people a lot of steps, but one guy that I said is always there that you can probably get in the ninth, 10th round of a PPR 12-man league is Matthew Stafford. You tweeted the other day that you felt as though Stafford was getting like over. I don't want to misquote you. What was the quote that you wrote on Twitter where you were talking about Matthew Stafford?
Yeah, it was something like that. The Matthew Stafford
He's
hype
overhyped.
is just getting out of control, right? Because, you know, ESPN put out their quarterback rankings that are from, you know, executives, coaches, players, and some guy had Matthew Stafford as number 4, like the 4th best quarterback in the NFL. And look, you know, there are people out there that think Stafford is a better quarterback than than I do, but ranking him 4 is just ridiculous. Like, it's just silly. By the mental gymnastics you need to do to get into 4 is crazy. Now, like, you know, he was 6th, I think, in the rankings overall, and it was up from 8th or something the year before. That's closer. Like, you can at least make an argument.
But Sam, they got McVay.
Right. And look, I think that Stafford might have a really good year this year. And certainly statistically, which is, you know, where your fantasy stuff comes in, I think that might still be a really smart play, because that offense should elevate quarterbacks and it should make them better from a statistical point of view. The question is, like, will it stop Stafford being inconsistent? And will it stop him, you know, making a decent number of mistakes compared with what he's capable of doing? And, you know, on our podcast, we had Seth Galina on this week, and we were talking a lot about Stafford. And it's like, you know, Stafford's highlight reel is as good as Mahomes, as good as Aaron Rodgers, as good as any quarterback in the NFL. Like, if all you're interested in is the good stuff, is what he does really well, you can make the argument that he's the best quarterback in the NFL. He's right up there with them. And that's why, right, you know, everyone always talks about his talent, and his talent is as high as anybody else. But every time you're watching him, you're like, but why isn't this better? Like, why isn't he Mahomes? Why isn't he Aaron Rodgers? And there's always been a group of people that just like dismiss that as, well, it's the Lions, right? It's Detroit's fault. Matthew Stafford is great. The reason he isn't Aaron Rodgers or Mahomes is because he's been playing in Detroit.
Right.
I just don't think that holds up. Like, he's always had pretty good pass protection. He had Megatron for half his career. Like, he hasn't been let down by the group around him. And they've chopped and changed coaches a lot. And we've heard 3 or 4 times that the next one has been the guy that's fixed Matthew Stafford, right? You know, 6 games of Jim Bob Cooter at offensive coordinator, and it's like the light's gone on, and then it stops happening again because Stafford is just always inconsistent, and he never, you know, maintains that level for any extended period of time. So I think he might have like a career year with the Rams, but I don't know if he will get significantly better even within this offense.
But don't you think when people talk about Stafford, or at least for me, I guess my point of view is like I'm always you said a key word. They're talking about the talent level, right? But I'm talking about arm talent. If you're talking about the highlight reel, or I guess from Matthew Stafford, it would be based on arm talent. And I guess my perspective of Matthew Stafford is a lot like what I feel like Herbert or I guess Josh Allen had a really, really good year last year. But prior to last year, I would have probably grouped them in that same category, right? I think the main thing that I think makes a quarterback or makes us a lot more hopeful for Joe Burrow is the processing. So the different things that I've seen from Matthew Stafford is the lack of processing in very key moments, or the clutch gene, or the different thing that you need, I guess, at the end of a game. I don't think McVay or whatever solves that, I guess, is what I would tell to the guy that had him ranked number 4.
But it is interesting because, like, Stafford, all the things that you want in a quarterback, Stafford does have. It just, you don't always see it, right? It's like he does have the kind of clutch thing, right? Whereas he's got a ton of fourth quarter comebacks. He does bring them back a lot. He's got the toughness. There are those videos where he just takes this shot, jumps up, and kind of struggles his way to the line and makes the next play. He's got all those things. Plus, his arm talent is genuinely up there with the best in the NFL. Like he can do things that only that group of Mahomes, Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers can do. So he's right up there with those guys. But, when you talk about talent overall, you have to fold in like the mental side of things as well. Yeah. And he isn't on the level of guys like Tom Brady when it comes to the mental processing stuff. It's not that he's, not intelligent. He just isn't as consistent as those guys. And that is a thing. That is part of talent. That is like a mental trait of playing this game. And I don't think that is explained by the Detroit Lions. I think that's just something that is in Matthew Stafford. And again, I just don't think that, suddenly pairing him with Sean McVay, like it removes that from his game. I think that's part of who he is.
What the heck are the Lions doing? Like, when you look at, I look at that roster and I just say, what are they doing?
I mean, I think they're obviously rebuilding, but I think the thing with them is they have job security, right? So everyone that came in, Dan Campbell, their new GM, they've got the time. They've got 6-year contracts. They know it's not going to get fixed in one off season, so they can go, all right, let's concentrate on one area this year, and the next season we'll concentrate on the next area. So this year they've gone heavily with the offense and defensive line. They've gone to fix it in the trenches, right?
Right.
And look, there are data points to say that's not the way to do it. You should get the more valuable positions first. You should find receivers and cornerbacks. But I think there's also a point of, look, offensive line and defensive line tend to take longer to develop. So maybe you do want to get a jump on those guys and get them year 1, and then year 2 you can come back with the receivers, because there's a ton of these guys that hit the ground running, and you don't necessarily need to give them like the lead up time or the redshirt freshman rookie year before they're up to speed. And then presumably somewhere along the line they're going to find the quarterback, because I think Jared Goff was taken essentially as a salary dump for the Rams. It's part of that deal to get the 2 first-round picks. And if that wasn't true, I think they'd have done more to give Goff some receiver help this year, right?
Right.
Because they haven't, I think that tells you all you need to know.
That's what I was saying. It's like, I could get with you talking about let's fix the trenches and stuff, but to totally ignore the position, to me, is a big red flag that, that something is not going on. It bodes well for my fantasy, because now TJ Hawkinson is definitely a target of mine. Like, that's another one of my big sleepers. Like, you can get him in the 6th, 7th round in most 12-man leagues, and he's absolutely going to see over 100 targets. He saw 97 last year, right? Yeah. And then, now you put together wide receivers I've never even heard of on the back of the room. I've never even seen those guys.
But I think it just tells you that that they know this year is a write-off, right? They're not trying to be as good as they can be this year. They're not giving Jared Goff the weapons he needs to show anything other than Jared Goff is a sacrificial lamb for them this season, right? Jared Goff's out there. He's a quarterback people have heard of, so it won't be like a total mutiny that it might have been if they'd been, hey, David Blau is the starting quarterback this year. That'd have been a riot. Jared Goff's at least a big enough name that, you're not going to have a complete disaster on your hands, but he doesn't have a chance to win because he's got nobody to throw to. You're right. Hawkinson's the only guy that he's going to have any degree of like comfort level with.
Right.
So, you know, they're going to try and blood the offense and the defensive line. And then next offseason, they're probably going to be in a good position to grab, you know, a Spencer Rattler or whoever it is at the top of the draft and get the quarterback and the receivers.
Right. I got you. I guess before I let you head out of here, you've been very, very generous with your time. If you guys are late to the pod, just make sure you follow Sam at PFF_Sam. Is that correct? That's correct,
Yep,
right?
got it.
Okay. One thing I wanted to ask you though, from a fantasy perspective, because we got into that a little bit with Stafford. Are there some guys that you feel as though are super underrated and some guys that are super overrated approaching fantasy football this year for somebody watching for their team?
Yeah, it's tough. I think that, you know, Emmanuel Sanders going to Buffalo is a really interesting one.
I think you're just a Emmanuel Sanders fan.
I am. I like Emmanuel Sanders, but I also think, look, somebody has got to pick up the role that John Brown left in that offense, right? Which is like the deep threat. I think people are pegging it to be Gabriel Davis, who looked good last year. But when they swapped out John Brown and Gabriel Davis, it wasn't quite the same. Like Gabriel Davis doesn't have exactly the same skill set as John Brown, but Emmanuel Sanders can win like at all levels of the defense. And he might not be great at any of them, but I think he's going to work his way into that system and be like an important part of that offense. And that offense is going to air the ball out. Like they pass more than anybody else in, you know, neutral situations, 1st and 10, that kind of thing. So yeah, like he is going to be, I think, an interesting sleeper, particularly, you know, certain weeks. I think you're going to find Emmanuel Sanders going off and you know, it'll catch people by surprise.
Emmanuel Sanders. I guess for me, he burnt me so many times in fantasy football. Like I have like, oh Lord. Okay. Other than that, I just want to say thank you very much for coming on the pod today. Like again, I said my partner Ace, he couldn't be with us today, but he's definitely watching him. I saw him in the comments a couple of times. Please tell everybody where they can check your stuff out at right now if they didn't hear it throughout the show.
Yeah, PFF.com obviously is where all my written stuff is. We got a sale going right now, 40% off. Save 40, I think, is the sale, the promo code. So get yourself a PFF subscription now, or the PFF NFL podcast with myself and Steve.
Yes, if you want to argue with people like I do online all day, you're going to need PFF subscription. Trust me, you're going to need to pull up some numbers because there's going to be somebody that's going to be saying, I don't believe you. And that's where you're going to pull it up. I want to make sure you know, whenever you come to Cincy, we are one of our sponsors of the show, Midwest Barbecue. If you ever come to Cincy, you're going to have to come to the office. You're going to have to do something there. Come to Midwest Barbecue, best barbecue in town, best chicken. Also check out me at zimhude.com. This is Burrow Babies. I want you to tell anybody that you know that's a Bengals fan, because I know that you probably don't believe in us all the way yet, but this is the start of a new day for you, Sam. I want you to know that this is a day you'll never forget. You came on this guy's podcast. He was kind of crazy, and he told me Burrow's about to light the league up. This is a whole lot of orange coming your way. Thank you very much. You have a great day. Love you guys at PFF and continue to do great work. This is it. I'm going to leave you guys with a yes, sir, ski.